What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today we are going to be doing my top 30 tackles in the 2025 NFL Draft. It is that time. Tackles are a big passion of mine, so we're going to be going over the 30 guys who I studied in all 22, and we're going to mention some dudes right now who I didn't get to study with all 22, but super excited for it, and hope you guys are too. If you are new, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. You guys know how to use YouTube. Click that link tree. You get to explore all the other socials, so including Twitter or call it X, whichever one you want to do now. But it's a great spot where I post all my all 22 tape, including on these offensive tackles. The majority of them have reps on there that you get to see me explain in this. But if you are new to the series, I'm going to be showing you basically my grade breakdown in terms of letters, but it's actually based on numbers, so can't give the full transparency there, but it kind of keeps the intrigue. But I also am going to be reading an actual game scouting report from my own notes. So, super excited for that. But it is key for us to understand how I actually grade the position. So, first off, we do not only have it graded by numerically. I think the numbers, numbers are just numbers until they tell a story. So I also have it as tiers. So you guys will be able to see the starting tier. So that's going to be 75 and above. Tier 2 is going to be those dudes who I think they could sub in, get some reps, but they definitely still have a little bit more development until I am confident with them being a full-time starter. And then the developmental guys who I think that they should be taking a year or maybe a little bit more. And then the guys who are backups, maybe they have a couple more years to develop and they just have a longer road to success. But I always say, great players are able to jump probably 2 tiers. And, there's always those special players that have that special motivation to really get better and they're in the right situation. So there's just certain situations that could promote a tier boost. But this is a holistic view of offensive linemen. So feel free to disagree. I always say you can be a dick, just don't be a dick about it. I'm perfectly fine with criticism. Just understand that I prefer constructive criticism rather than just badgering. Dream fits are just going to be there more for fun than anything. So don't take that too seriously. But looking at how I numerically grade players, you got pass block and run block. That's a holistic view of that. Basically, how efficient are you? I'm not talking about numerical efficiency as in you go to PFF and you see that. I'm talking about for me, doesn't look like it, but I played offensive line for 7 years. So I have a solid foundation in understanding offensive line mechanics and whether you're winning or not and why you're winning or not. So this is one of the positions offensive tackle and then corner are probably the 2 positions I feel the most confident in. Corner, I have no idea why, but I love corners and I seem to be very confident in my abilities to be able to predict who's going to be good or not at that position. I digress. But pass block, run block essentially is a holistic view on basically how good you are, because there's a lot of other factors that play into it. And if you start over analyzing certain aspects, that's where you could really start losing the actual understanding of football, because when you start taking analysis too deep, you really start either wasting your time or wasting other people's, and there's just no need for that. Sometimes you can just be a good pass blocker. But anchor is super duper critical. I kind of want to increase its value respectively to the rest of the grading system, but at the same time, anchor is not everything. It still is a very, very large category for me. But it's can you hold your ground? And re-anchor is a portion of the anchor grade, because, some guys just get popped and they start losing a little bit of ground. But if you can reestablish yourself, that's perfectly fine as well. Mechanics-wise, that is both a combination of footwork as well as upper body mechanics. That some dudes just need to really work on their footwork, and I think that is something you could develop far better than it is upper body. And that's why you also see hands placement is a form of upper body mechanics. It's where you're striking. But for me, I think that mechanics are super duper critical, especially in the upper body portion, to be able to have success at the next level. But you still need to have lower body mechanics, otherwise you're going to fail, versus these technicians at the next level that really will take advantage of guys who are not properly polished. Power, relatively indicative. It's lower body power and upper body power. Again, if you start over analyzing stuff by splitting them, it's you're what the hell are you doing, man? There's just a certain point where you can actually discuss what's actually better rather than having to have its own category. Then mobility, also relatively self-explanatory there. It's basically how quickly you move. IQ, it's how well you process when there's switches. I mean, this is something that I think I'm still developing in. It's understanding the system. Like for Penn State last year, their offensive lineman couldn't switch unless the other guy said to switch. So there's certain little nuances that I'm still developing in that category, but it's pretty obvious when a player has no idea who they're blocking and they're being very, very reactive, sometimes delayed and reactive rather than being proactive. And you could just tell. Like, you're around someone who's super stressed, you instantly can feel the stress. When I watch an offensive lineman block, I can feel if they are stressed or not. And then hands, it's hands placement. So are you grabbing out here, or are you grabbing right here in that chest plate? Because you start grabbing out here, first off, when you have your arms wide like that, you don't really have that same level of control that you do when you're in close, which allows defenders to shed you very easily. But more importantly, well, maybe less importantly, but still important, you're going to get flagged a lot more, because if you're in here and your arms are moving around and stuff, it's much more difficult for refs to see a holding call. And so if you can be more in control and less penalty prone, I feel like that is something that does matter. It factor is the plus or minus that essentially allows me to do checks and balances for stuff like maybe guys just really have short arms, or some guys have had injury history. Maybe on the other side, guys have really good motor, and some of them are pointing out other blocking assignments to other players. There are instances where I end up boosting players overall because of that factor. So that is a long-winded way of saying this is the context to how I actually grade players, especially at the offensive tackle position. But let's get right into this, starting out with the guys who are the honorable mentions. Fernando Carmona from San Jose State. There's just no San Jose State All-22. I don't grade players based off of normal game tape. You theoretically could, but I've fallen in love with the aspect of being able to be extremely precise with my analysis, and I just don't think that watching a camera who's like pretty much just focused on one angle the whole time is enough for me. So I prefer the angles of All-22 far more, and so I'm not going to be going on YouTube and looking at, for you guys who don't have access to All-22, which you guys can always DM me and then I'll tell you like where to go. But, Do a Barrel Roll is a really good source for watching game tape back, and it's how I started. But once I started really being able to get the majority of dudes in All-22, that's just what I like to stick to. And it allows way more transparency. It keeps it even, because sometimes like it just depends on the camera operator. Sometimes they zoom in really close to where guys look more athletic than they do. So All-22 just makes it a lot more in terms of like fairness. It makes it a lot more equal in terms of the analysis. So Fernando did not have that, but he's transferring to Arkansas. Super excited to see him play. I've seen him mentioned in first rounds of mock drafts. JC Davis, pretty sure he's from New Mexico State, transferring to Illinois. Illinois lost 2 of their tenured offensive linemen this past year to the draft, and Julian Pearl, as well as Isaiah Adams. So he's listed as a guard on PFF, but he's listed as a tackle for Illinois. I'm considering him a tackle, 6'5", 320. He was also a tackle there for New Mexico State. Now we're going to talk about Jonathan Mendoza as well. These are my 3 honorable mentions because I do want to bring him into the fold. He's a Yale offensive tackle, and he transferred to Louisville. So Louisville is actually a really good school for this year, like very underrated. So I'm very excited to see how they're going to perform. Jonathan did a pretty damn good job there for the Ivy League. So those are my 3 honorable mentions. So technically it's a top 33 because I'm mentioning 3 other guys. I ain't going to do that. We ain't all about that. But there are actually 30 players here, and some of these are repeats from before because I did a top tackles of the draft. I also had the top interior offensive lineman. So some of these guys are from both. Joshua Gray is theoretically a left tackle. He was mentioned in my top interior offensive line video, but he's back. And my opinion of him is very, very similarly, but you know what? You guys are still going to end up getting a new aspect, which is reading a game summary, like pretty much a whole entire game scouting report, which these are meant to be written for me, and they're written play by play. It's as I'm watching the game, I'm just writing down how I feel, and sometimes my notes contradict themselves. Maybe some guy looks really, really, really slow at the beginning of the game, and then you realize as the game goes on, oh, his mobility improved. You guys get to actually experience that experience with me live, so you're essentially watching a game through my perspective of this player. I do it because you guys like it. And honestly, I think it adds a lot more context than just speaking about the fact that I don't trust this guy to run or pass block. Like, what information does that give you that my notes don't, or that my that the graphic doesn't? So I think this is a cool way of being able to add extra context to the graphics. So Joshua Gray, let's talk about his notes from UCLA. I actually have one of each game for every player listed right here, and I learned this. It was actually quite helpful for the receiver video rather than having to scroll up and down. Why don't I do the work before and I actually organize them the way that I did here? So we did. Joshua Gray, so he's listed as probably going to be shifted to guard. He is very, very thin. He almost looks like a tight end. So this is versus UCLA. He whiffed on the first play. He did the same thing on the second. I said he has alligator arms, so very, very short, like looks almost like a T-Rex. Extremely athletic. Another effing whiff. My God, this is painful. Well over 20 plays in, and he has yet to win a single rep. I am literally disgusted. UDFA, don't even think I could put the FA. This dude is CFL grade. So bottom line, like it was really, really quick, but when there's something that's not notable, and I've already noted it, there's certain games that are going to be much, much shorter. And the guys who are much longer with their evaluations, most of the time, either are guys I'm trying to love more, i.e. it's like a third or fourth game where I'm like, dude, I do not like this player remotely close to the consensus, so let's try again and again and again. But usually, if it's short, probably not short and sweet. So it's a little bit short and bitter with Joshua Gray. The bottom line is I just didn't see him winning any translatable reps to the NFL. And he's extremely athletic. So I think that he could be someone that is more, if he slims down to like 280, like you could use him absolutely as a blocking tight end that could probably catch. And, you know, you don't have to have the biggest arm length for that. Like, I just would love to be able to see him in more of a gadget role for the Pac-12 at the time. You know, they didn't have a plethora of top-tier edge rushers, but in the most translatable game to the NFL, and he was going up against alligator arm dudes there as well. The Murphy brothers did not have like 35-inch arms. He was struggling. So definitely a big concern there, but he is hypermobile. I love that about him. And he's someone that can be used as a gadget offensive lineman. I'm sure you can add him as that sixth offensive lineman and then, you know, maybe just see what you can use with him. But for me, definitely concerned with the translatability of his game. And y'all know I love Tali Fuaga, so Oregon State, kind of my thing. Now we go to Gerald Mincey out of Kentucky, formerly, I'm pretty sure he's formerly formerly Tennessee. So I ended up watching a couple games of his. This is my notes of his game versus Alabama. And first off, good size. I mean, 6'6", 340. That's also very Kentucky of him. But, you know, they we'll be talking about the other Kentucky tackle, Marques Cox, in a little bit. But Gerald Mincey ended up playing games at both left and right tackle. I ended up trying to focus on a right tackle game here with Alabama because that is the game that he's going to play. He has a lag before properly processing what's been going on. He was thrown off by UDFA defensive interior. I'm forgetting the name of him off the top of my head, but you know, that instantly disqualified him from being a guard for me. Is if you can't handle non-NFL defensive interiors, probably not going to handle NFL defensive interiors. Not really seeing any NFL translatable traits so far. His best trait has been outside zone blocking, but he still has slip-ups. His hands just slid off of another defensive interior, Tim Smith, so he does not have control when blocking. He has shit mirroring too. Damn, I wanted to like this guy. So yes, these are not like professionally written notes. These are just for myself, my honest reactions. His pass protection is arguably the worst in the entire class. He has awful balance. This dude has been on the ground way too much. Oh my lord, worst tracking downfield I have ever seen from an offensive tackle. What the hell? Literally is ass. So, unfortunately, I wanted to like Gerald Mincey a lot more than I did. For some reason, University of Kentucky cannot get a good right tackle to save their life. The last one that they had that was solid was Darian Kennard, and Darian Kennard has been a journeyman, to say the least. So, you know, really hoping that changes, but it did suck because I both love Tennessee and Kentucky. Those are both schools that I like guys from, probably disproportionately to other analysts, and This is not the case. So I don't really know what position he can play. He technically graded out better than Josh Gray, but Josh Gray has a potential future at a different position for me. Gerald Mincey couldn't handle the interior defensive lineman. Most of the time, I'm like, oh, maybe you can kick a guy to guard. That wasn't really the case here. Now let's talk about Wyatt Milum, and this is one that really broke my heart. I ended up watching like way more tape on Milum than I really wanted to. But I mean, I watched his game versus Penn State, versus Baylor, as many games as I could watch of his, and every time I liked him less and less. And I really didn't want to like not enjoy watching Wyatt Milum. Like, he's somebody who I was genuinely really trying to like a lot more. And I was like, when I started looking at the gimme games like Baylor, which I'll read my notes for Baylor, I think that's very indicative of the fact that this is a game that he should have done better in. But you know, when you got guys who I really respect, like Connor Rogers, having Wyatt Milum, I think is a top 10 tackle, it's certainly it's something that's hard to personally understand. But I've had guys that guys don't have. Like, I've had guys at number 1 in lists, and I have a guy on this list that is number 1 that probably won't be in people's top 15. So, you know, it is what it is. It's personal opinion, but you know, that's the beauty of this, is that you can watch 5 different analysts talk about the same player, and unless they're just pretty much copying other people's opinions and not being original, you'll get 5 different responses. So super duper awesome that, you know, you get to do that. It's why, you know, the fact that you guys can follow me and other people as well. But I owe you guys honesty, and really, really didn't like this player overall, and I really wanted to, because I also like West Virginia. I mean, I think the thing that I found out is that I like a lot of teams now that I started doing the draft analysis. I just want players to be good, because good football is always better than like spotting the dud. So it's unfortunate, but I'll read my notes from Baylor. He's not very powerful. His hands don't have a lot of pop. He got backed up on a switch by a defensive lineman, showing that he should probably be tackle exclusive. That is a way that I end up analyzing whether a guy can be guard versatile, is on those reps where theoretically there's a switch, or maybe you're looking at a zone blocking where, you know, basically they let the edge rusher go and they go and block a defensive interior. Can they handle the power and the weight? And Milum could not. He ends up he gets backed up by defensive interiors, and if you're getting backed up by a defensive interior, most likely you're not going to be able to handle defensive interiors, especially when you have to hold the interior of a pocket. I do have my concerns there, because they don't bring as much speed to power. So, you know, if you can't handle that, then it's more of a size issue. And if it's a size issue, probably shouldn't be playing against that size. I digress. Seeing very little control, and his hands continue to slide off of players. He cannot land punches in the run game. He's holding even when the defender tries peeling away, which draws flags. He had an absolutely ass rep on an inside swim move and he straighted up hugged a guy. I do remember that rep very clearly. He ended up losing the rep, and rather than, you know, essentially trying to like basically last ditch effort get in the guy's way, he ended up hugging him instead. It's like, that's gonna call a flag every single time in the NFL. Like, NFL refs know to look for guys hugging. And we're going to get to another hugging rep. That's what really was the kick in the nuts for me. But he doesn't have a fluid kick slide at all. He's literally hugging defenders. Like, that ended up being a consistent theme, is that he ends up hugging defensive players. This is the worst tackle I've studied at that point. I don't know about Gray, though. He was ass. Cutting this shit early. Like, it was genuinely a disgrace not being able to watch a player land his hands and resorting to hugging, especially lower quality players like Baylor. No disrespect to the Baylor Bears, but I think we all know these guys are not the equivalent of NFL talent. So when I first watched him versus Penn State, he struggled mightily. And when I realized he couldn't handle himself versus Baylor at an NFL translatable level, especially when you're resorting to penalty style moves, it's something that I couldn't let slide. And I'm hoping that he develops. You know, there is reason to like him. He does have lower leg power to some degree. C is average, by the way. It's not like he's a dumbass either. I don't think that he's an NFL translatable tackle. If you can't hit your hands, that's not a good sign, because defenders will take advantage of you every single time they get better at the next level. So, I mean, I want to be positive about all these players. That's the thing. I know that might make me sound abrasive when I end up bringing up a lot of negatives, but at the end of the day, how many of these guys are actually going to get reps in the NFL? Not many, right? Every single time it'll be like 5 to 10 dudes who can potentially even start. So when we're talking about a group of 30 guys, unfortunately, we got to start off on a sour note, but that's why I ended up flipping it to where we start off on a sour note and end on a good note, because it used to be 1 to 30, and I'm like, the hell am I doing? But I digress. 27 is Xavier Chaplin, left tackle out of Virginia Tech. So big, bulky bruiser. That's what I like about him. The thing is, he's mobile and he's powerful. Like, you guys see that with the grades. That's something that is definitely workable for me. But let's look at my notes of him versus NC State, where NC State doesn't have the best edge rushers, but they do have guys like David Van that can bring that edge rushing presence from the defensive interior. So let's do it. And he got a sub 20 pass block grade versus Florida State. That's why I ended up watching him versus NC State. It's like sometimes when there is that atrocious of a game, you know, like some guys just have a really shitty day. And NC State still had NFL translatable talent. I wanted to make sure that I watched that for sure. So first play, he ended up whiffing. That was a great one. This guy looks like he doesn't understand how to process the game. He has awful hand placement as well. At least he punches and is okay in pass protection so far. He gave up his outside shoulder. He literally passed an edge off to no one to try to block a QB spy. So, yeah, the IQ needs to improve. Well, there's a reason why it's an F, and you're hearing it why. They always roll the quarterback to the other side, never his way. Zero awareness of the pocket structure. And I think this is super key because it translates to a lot of other players as well. When I'm talking about giving up the outside shoulder or the position in the pocket or the boundary of the pocket, like a pocket is supposed to be shaped like this, right? Like it's supposed to be a pocket. When an offensive tackle who is essentially going to dictate whether it's curved like that or like essentially like that, when they don't know where the pocket is, you're either going to be giving up an easy angle to the outside to the quarterback, or you're giving up an easy inside lane. Or if you have just like garbage positioning, you can give them both. And for Xavier Chaplin, that's why I'm listing him as an offensive lineman. Like when you don't know how to process very well and you don't know where the pocket is, you mitigate that issue when you have a center and a tackle next to you, because that's your mental reference of where you're supposed to be. So a lot of guys who have lower IQ grades, I prefer to kick inside, especially when you have good mobility and good power, because I think that that is super key for limiting, like it's just called risk management. You limit your risk, and the biggest risk is the fact that this guy doesn't know who to block, when to block, where to block. I digress. Let's get back to the notes though. He has strong arms and is not unathletic, but that is primarily his only assets, or they are his primary assets. Maybe try him at guard so it mitigates the IQ and his misfires in space. He might even have upwards of 34.5 to 35-inch arms. He flashes when using one-arm reach-outs, and he refires, which is a huge plus trait to have. I just have no faith in him, given the other deficiencies, to ever be able to take reps as a tackle. I mean, I think there's a game that happens with your body in the NFL, but you win or lose reps based off of your processing of the game. So if you're able to mitigate that and you can have a guard that is extremely powerful, very mobile with long arms, that's something that I'm looking for. And that's why mechanics is not an F either, because like when you do have those base tools, like you can reach out with one arm and refire your hands, like that's something I do appreciate, but there's just a lot to his game that really needs to improve. And you know, that's why I have that 1+ it factor for him. It's the fact that I see what he can be, and that's a big difference from 28 to 27. And like theoretically, you could see a 1.25 point jump, but you also realize that that 1.25 point jump is much larger because the IQ grade is much lower than we just spoiled it. We spoiled the next two. It's much lower than the guy before him. Let's talk about Bless Harris next. Former Florida State tackle. So we'll talk about his game versus Duke, because he ended up having some struggles here and there. Like I think versus Wake, he had some struggles as well. But you know, there was a healthy rotation of offensive linemen there for Florida State. And, going to TCU is not a bad place to go. You got Brandon Coleman, who just got drafted in the 3rd round. It's a good spot for developing talent, and especially when you have power like Brandon Coleman did. This is a great opportunity for him to be able to, be out of that potential threatening rotation, which, to be fair, I think iron sharpens iron. If you have that threat, you usually play better, but this is still a spot that is proven to develop NFL level offensive line talent. So I do appreciate that still. His anchor was compromised from the first down. He has solid hand placement in his strikes and pass protection. He has high pass blocking grade versus top tier defenses. So I was questioning why he slipped up versus Duke and Wake Forest, because I like RJ Oben. Shout out to Notre Dame. They did a fantastic job in the transfer portal this year, but definitely have my concerns there. He did not maintain a mirror, and then he ended up getting chopped and bent. So essentially, you can have an initial, you could respond perfectly to what a defender does off the bat, but it's the consistency throughout the rep that I think is super duper important, because even though the NFL might have these quick plays, theoretically I could have tossed Miami on here because they're very focused on just getting the ball out quick. There's still an aspect to the game that, you're still playing chess versus these defenders, and players who actually get to start at tackle can mirror defenders. That's a big reason why there's a lot of mirror drills that you see in the Senior Bowl. You also see it as well in the combine. So continuing on here, he has a hard time changing directions left to right. We're talking about that mirroring issue. His anchor has popped up as a major issue. Overly patient at points to the point of detriment, allowing defenders to initiate contact. He ended up getting blown by a defender because he was too patient. When he loses big time. Ended up getting hurt as well this game. So just somebody that he has those flashes for sure, but when you have that lateral mobility issue and it ends up showing up versus defenders, I mean, you're talking about going up against Laiatu Latu, who takes advantage of guys who have a hard time mirroring. And you might say Laiatu Latu is a first-round pick. Of course he's going to feast. Laiatu Latu is a player who is a standard edge rusher in the NFL. He's really good, and he's going to be probably one of the better edge rushers in the NFL, absolutely. But at the same time, that's the talent you face every week, right? So, this is against RJ Oben, and I'm forgetting the name of the other edge rushers for Duke, but if you can't handle them, there's not a good chance you're going to be handling the NFL guys. So hopefully that continues to develop. And anchor is just a big concern, man. If you get driven back and you can't reestablish yourself, there's a big issue. And yeah, there's definitely going to be some concerns. Now we're going to talk about Xavier Truss. He's going to be on my interior offensive line rankings significantly higher than this. That's why I have him as a guard. And I think everybody who watches Xavier Truss knows he's a guard. You just watch him and it's unfortunate that he has to play so many reps at tackle. But let's talk about his game versus Alabama. Most of the time, if there's a Florida State-Alabama game, I will study it. Also because A, first-round edge defenders. B, really solid defensive interior players that you get to see that translatability potentially to guard. I digress. This game actually was 11 reps at left guard and 51 at right tackle. So it's a really good way for you guys to see the change from tackle to guard, or guard to tackle. So he has violent hands and he's a good athlete. Remember, this is starting out as a guard. He ended up putting his hands to the face of the defender on the first play. So he's also at risk of leaning forward way too much. I call it toesy. You can call it even lungy, but regardless, he needs to sit back a little more into his heels. He ended up having a great wall off in inside zone. I ended up, I believe, posting that on my Twitter, so feel free to check that out with the link tree. I was about to say the LinkedIn. I'm like, you guys can follow, you guys can request me on LinkedIn, but probably not going to be the place where I post anything exciting, if anything at all. But he had a great switch, but he ended up being backed up into the quarterback. Excellent job switching on runs. Anchor seems to be a bit of an issue. His tackle anchor is significantly worse than his guard anchor. So you could tell based on my tone when he switched. His tackle kick slide is extremely choppy. There is a night and day difference between him as a guard and a tackle. He handles defensive interior linemen much better and much more efficiently than edge players as well. And I think it comes down to the amount of room that edge rushers have to be able to charge up and develop that speed that they can transition to power, but also because Xavier, since he is mechanically poor in terms of the lower mechanics at tackle, he just doesn't have that foundation to be able to handle that much space and that much variability in the rep. So he's going to grade up far superior. He's damn near a fringe guard in the NFL. So keep that in mind. That video will probably be out in a week, if not a week and a half. Like, it just depends on graphics, if I'm going to be completely blunt. And to be fair, I just rotated to a new job. If you guys know me, I'm like doing rotational stuff at a chemical firm, but I just rotated to a new job that is far more demanding on a day-by-day basis. So I won't be having the time to be able to scout players the way I was with my previous, but that doesn't really matter. We're still going to be getting through all these guys because I ended up loving the fact that I've found like my little dark horse guys here and there. But let's continue on to Jalen Rivers. By the way, if you see OL next to these guys' name, there's a good chance, unless I'm really, really, really like kind of wishing for them to be an offensive tackle, they will be included with the interior offensive line rankings. But Jalen Rivers is next, left tackle for Miami. This is his game versus Florida State, but he ended up starting off the game having a solid switch. This was his worst graded game, but it's also the most translatable game out of what's available. He takes a wide drop rather than a deep one, putting him out of position versus edge rushers. So you know how like a tackle is supposed to essentially drop like, almost like a 45-degree angle to both get depth, but also be able to get in the way of an edge rusher from getting an easy angle to the quarterback. He essentially went like almost flat, like to the side to get in the way of the defender. Like, I could get back like this. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Like, get back. Like, he went like that. So that was something I saw a lot, and it's very unfortunate, but I digress. It happened again. There you go. So there's not very much pop in the hands. He's very, very soft on contact. He really struggles laterally when the play does not go perfectly. There's solid awareness of where the ball is and when to disengage and to go further. Defenders can slide off his blocks, so he doesn't have very good control. He really struggles laterally when the play... Oh, I just read that, dumbass. But defenders can slide off his blocks. I can't see him ever starting in the NFL at this talent level, but with precise improvements, I can see him developing to even become a star. So there's a lot of developmental potential with him. It's a weird range, but it really is boom or bust. Of course, he ends up getting beaten on an inside counter because he ends up getting too much width, and he doesn't really get back. Quarterback drifted into a sack, so it's not really his fault. I think there was a pressure, but it shouldn't have been attributed to him. He absolutely whiffed on a defender. I have never seen a whiff that bad on a linebacker. Oh yeah, I do remember that one. He basically lunged forward, and the linebacker just blew past him, and you could see him be like, and it was like, oh. Yeah, you didn't even realize that you messed up that badly. So it was a bit embarrassing. He has struggles adjusting laterally to quick defenders. He needs to be more consistent with his hand placement. He has gotten his hands chopped multiple times because he's out of position and he does not adjust properly. She ends up struggling in key situations. So certainly a project guy. I think he has a solid foundation of athleticism as well as processing, as you guys were hearing. But there's certainly a lot that needs to be developed. I did end up seeing like it with him, but the chances of that being a down-by-down basis in the NFL is very low. The probability of him actually succeeding is very low. But I think the ceiling is highest with him out of all the tackles we studied so far, except maybe Chaplin at guard. Now let's continue on. I talked about this guy earlier, Marques Cox. I think I'm saying that right. It might be Marquise, but I'll call him Marques Cox. It's Marcus, who cares? We'll read his notes versus Georgia. 6'5", 311, by the way. Solid build. Left tackle there for Kentucky. His hands are okay. He needs to get them more inside in the run game. His anchor has been overall quite solid. He is patient, and he has quite solid balance. And you can tell he has a B- in anchor. Not many guys do. He could be a little deer in the headlightsy in the run game. He does a nice job staying square to the defender. His hands continued to move outwards. Mikel Williams had an easy shed because his hands were outside. So just like I was talking about, when you need to keep your hands in versus out, there's a reason why. Physics actually matters. Strength and torque actually matter. You don't need to be hearing a lesson from me, though, in that basically when your hands are outside, defenders can take advantage. So keep your hands inside, offensive linemen. I know it's not as easy to make contact when you're hitting a smaller target, but aim small, miss small. Just remember that. He cannot seem to win versus speed defenders. He cannot handle lateral moves at all. I think it's Javon Walker. Javon Walker is driving him all the way to the quarterback. He is poor downfield tracking. Oh, Lord, he just loses extremely badly. So when he loses big. Pretty awful performance overall, but he had a good start, and he ended up, unfortunately, waning quickly and horribly. So Anchor ended up waning here and there, but I thought overall, the majority of the time, it was not an issue. It was just the rest of his game, I think, put him in a poor situation to where, he needs to really, really develop. And especially when you don't know who to block in the run game, you essentially become a non-factor. Now we're going to talk about Earnest Greene. Again, it's I'm having him higher as a guard, so keep that in mind. You can end up checking out my first video of my interior offensive lineman to be able to understand where he is there. Spoiler alert, didn't regrade him again after regrading him, but this is going to be his Alabama performance. So there's a game where he actually has a 7 PFF grade, and this was not it. But he's a limited athlete. He has some flashes, but he lacks control, leading to his hands slipping. He handles interior defensive line builds so much better. He probably should be an offensive guard. He got long-armed into the quarterback. He has apparently 35-inch arms, though, so it does not end up popping up, but apparently it's there. He ended up getting long-armed again into the quarterback, and he continues giving up his outside shoulder angle to the quarterback. He had poor timing on a switch for pressure, and he also ended up looking a lot more comfortable when the other guard, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, ended up pulling and essentially acting as a tackle. So he looked a lot more comfortable when he had players next to him, which to me, when you look far more in control, when you are not playing essentially a tackle position for that play, to me that screams that you feel more comfortable as a guard. And especially with lateral mobility issues and such, it just makes total sense for me. So Earnest Greene, certainly somebody who I think will be transitioning to a guard and having a far more successful time than what initially it seems. But Tristan Leigh is next. It might be Tristan Leigh. I'm going to call it Tristan Leigh. So he's a cool guy, and he's actually active on Twitter, but he's a feisty dude. He is feisty. He ended up decking, because we'll talk about Kentucky. He ended up decking, why am I forgetting his name? Dayon Walker, and I ended up putting that up. So he ended up interacting with that tweet. So he's active on Twitter. You guys can add him, and then maybe you guys can hang out and chat with him. I do love what he brings to the table in terms of that physical profile. Very mobile, and he has reps where he absolutely dominates. Just talking about a translatability to the NFL, I think there were some things that let me down, and we'll talk about his game versus Kentucky. So he ended up letting up 7 pressures this game. Keep that in mind. But, I mean, these are versus NFL-level players. He instantly was pushed back by, there's a particular defender I ended up quoting and putting up. His name was pretty damn hard to pronounce, but number 90 on Kentucky. He has lots of stress when he blocks, but he's also very tenacious. He's a really solid athlete, definitely not built for larger edge rushers, so I ended up saying he's probably a specific tackle guy because when you can't handle the weight portion, you most likely will be tackle specific. He does not have really solid decisiveness like another tackle that we'll be talking about. I'm not going to spoil it, but I just said does not have insert tackle's name's decisiveness. He can get ahead of himself when he's pulling and leading, and it ends up leading to him sliding off blocks and even falling. His anchor is relatively suspect. I love the fact that he refires his hands. He ended up not tracking a stunt, which was one of the pressures. He seems to block the guy in front of him just to block more than block him the best way for the given play. So theoretically, there's just when there's a run coming his way, sometimes you'll see offensive linemen shift to the inside or wall to the outside to give your blocker the best chance of getting to the specified hole. For him, it's more so I am going to block the guy in front of me, not block him for the way that benefits the play the best. And for corners and receivers as well, I see this a lot. They're doing what they're kind of like told to do and not evolving it for actually what's going to affect the play the most positively. And like the guy, you'll see the top end players, they evolve their game and respond, and they're more proactive to respond to the play. And some guys just don't do that. Tristan, I think, will be sticking to a roster, but he's just one of those guys that I definitely see that issue with. So he's another guy I wouldn't mind developing, but he is not fringe. So his IQ ended up becoming an issue. He has horrible time switching. I don't know if he's developmental at this point until he actually gets more decisive. He gets bent too easily by edge rushers for a guy with this level of athleticism. So he gets out of position and he ends up not being able to utilize athleticism the best. He got out of position in the pocket. There you go. Allowing a clear lane to the quarterback. He gets easily out of position once he is engaged. So it's, again, one of that processing thing. Understanding what's going on behind you is super duper critical, and that happens because you understand the play, you understand your quarterback, and you understand how the play is evolving. Just certain players have that cerebral mindset, and again, for college, Tristan is a very, very good offensive tackle. Keep that in mind. I'm just trying to keep this in context for the NFL. So again, keep that in mind. He's a very good college tackle, but he loses longer engagements versus edge rushers. He's definitely reactive and not proactive. His athleticism is his primary asset. He got outlengthed and he got stiff-armed by an edge rusher. I want to like him more, but for NFL reasons, I just cannot. And then I ended up talking about Xavier Weaver. I think it's Xavier Weaver, but he ended up flashing a lot. So let's go to the next guy, Jeremiah Byers. Sick picture, by the way. This is from his Instagram, but this is just like Florida State knows how to make some freaking aura-licious type of vibe pictures. I love that about him. And again, whenever you see a powerful guy with like some okay mobility, and like most of the time we're gonna be dealing with him as a guard. But I ended up watching 2 games of his. Saw one earlier in the year versus Clemson. Also saw one versus Georgia. Let's look at the one versus Clemson because I ended up wanting to see. I wanted to see what it was like versus Georgia to see if there was that growth because I had some issues and saw the flashes and didn't really see that later on. So we'll just talk about his game versus Clemson. It's a much longer study because Georgia was a continuation, but both games are super duper critical. He struggled early in the year, but ended off well versus Georgia. Georgia was his best game, which again, I don't like studying just the best game because I think that's a little bit disingenuous to the whole body of work and translatability. But regardless, he has solid patience. He has a nasty one-arm punch. He can be at risk of placing his hands wide in pass protection. Would like his legs to remain active the whole play. Sometimes he ends up stopping it randomly. He's definitely willing to put the body on the line to help out his team. His kick slide is not ideal. It's very, very choppy. When he starts getting beat to the outside, he scarily has very poor form when it comes to mirroring. I feel like his lower mechanics are what gets him in trouble, which arguably is the easiest to fix. He needs to maintain his positioning in the pocket because he instantly shut down Xavier Thomas, but he gave up an easy angle to the quarterback after the fact. You can tell that he needs to be more aware of his position relative to the quarterback because he's blocking well and he just gives an easier angle than he should. Another pressure due to poor angle. His initial anchor can be spotty, but it seems to not be driven back too easily. So, basically, his initial anchor either will be good or bad, but he has better re-anchor. It seems to not be driven back too easily. So, yeah, re-anchor is better than his initial anchor. But regardless, he ended up leaving up another easy angle to the quarterback for a pressure. It seems like he has trouble holding the boundary to speed rushers. I did not get guard vibes, but if he can't hold the boundary and his footwork is meh, the guard could be the best spot to maximize his strengths. Another pressure due to his speed rusher around the edge. He has his first drop step is just too short, and that is what forces him to turn and run rather than slide and hold the boundary. He does seem a little light on his feet. He also is very, very thin. Like, his legs look a little bit thin, especially compared to the other players. If you watch him, you could tell he's the smallest offensive lineman they have on the field. But regardless, yeah, I just lost my place. You gotta be kidding me. He does seem a little bit light on his feet, where I wanted him to be more grounded and smooth with his movement. I heavily think he needs to retool his footwork, and he can shoot up massively. He needs to set a better foundation as well when he's firing his hands and keep his feet active and shoulders squared to the defender. Unfortunately, versus the Georgia game, did not see that improve, hence why he is here at 20, but there is certainly the ceiling there. Riley Mahlman is next. I like Riley Mahlman for the potential, but I think that he could be one of the few 6'8" guards. So I ended up saying he's a mountain. This is versus LSU. He's a bit slow laterally. I appreciate the patience he has for his game. He has a nice re-anchor. He ends up lunging in the run game. He needs to not swing his arms outside to make a contact inside. So he goes like this, almost like a dude doing like a butterfly, and then he ends up trying to make contact on the inside of the chest. Just fire straight. The shortest path is a straight line, not like a so almost feel as if he's a possible Andreas Pete situation as a tall guard. He needs to remain square to his target. He can get very, very toesy and not be able to react properly to counters. And so he can also end up on his ass. Bottom line, the translation is he needs to be more grounded in his feet, have better balance, because when you're not balanced, you can't react properly. You'll be off balance still, then you can end up on your tush. And an offensive lineman on his tush is not a good offensive lineman. He can't dip his head the way he likes to. Yeah, when he initiates contact, like he goes like that. When you lower your eyes, dude, top end edge rushers are going to take advantage of you every time. He gave up a sack literally due to his poor positioning on his toes, and he ended up dipping his head. Surprise, surprise. He freezes when he fires his hands, needs to keep the feet active when he does so. He ends up getting backed up way too easily for his size, but that is also a leverage issue when you are 6'8", hence why all the offensive tackles in the NFL are all not 6'8", because if leverage wasn't an issue, having a dude that is a mountain is going to be a massive asset versus having potential liabilities. So Mahlman, honestly, overall, you can see there's just some mechanical issues when it comes to how he's firing his hands and dipping his head. That's like kind of the key, and then his balance. And then the hands, just talked about it. So everything else is relatively adequate, and I think there's a lot of room for growth for Mahlman, and we might end up actually seeing that come to fruition. Robert Scott is next, another Florida State offensive lineman, also another left tackle. They rotated with Bless Harris. So he ended up getting hurt week 1, and then Georgia was a game where he ended up coming in on play number 7. So I ended up saying, like, later in the year, this is the most translatable rep. So, okay, came in on play 7, so it's pretty much a full start. He has solid lateral quickness. He's been moved in all directions in the run game, so when engaged for a period of time. Basically, he can be pushed backwards, he can be pushed to the side, he can be controlled in the run game. That's an issue I have with him. Nice length usage and pass protection versus Javon Walker. I am worried about the ability to mirror because the counter step on his kick slide was wonky. Basically, when you're shifting back, sometimes it doesn't look right. He ended up having a late switch. He can get lost on pull blocks. His anchor is iffy, but not awful. He is someone who seeks contact. Has an awful tendency to go really wide on sweeps, leaving a clear lane for the edge to the ball carrier. So initially, let's just say the edge rusher is here and he is here, and the runner is supposed to go behind him. Basically, it's supposed to be an off tackle wide zone play. Like, he ends up like going way wide initially when the ball carrier is here, leaving pretty much a clear lane for the edge rusher to get to the quarterback or the running back. And that ended up being something that ended up getting blown up later in the game. So it ended up coming to fruition as the issue there. But I digress. He needs to be more proactive and understand that he can't just do what he's told and has to do what's best for the play. There you go. He ended up being subbed out after. Overall, he had some very promising reps, and he could even be a guard if need be, to combat his issues and emphasize his strengths, but he needs to process better overall and maintain control of his reactions and planning, or else he will simply be a body and nothing more. Essentially, he's going to be the one who gets in his own way. So, continuing on, Falili Famo. I don't think I pronounced that correctly, but really do love this guy's tenacity. He's a fun player to watch. So this is a game versus UCLA. Again, if there's a Pac-12 guy, you bet your ass I'm watching him versus UCLA. So he ended up giving an inside angle right away. There's no awareness of where the QB is, leading to easy angles, not necessarily poor blocking. He ended up missing his hands on all of his blocks so far. That ended up getting better as the game went on a little bit, but it is what it is. This guy needs to be a guard. He just does not know how to properly establish the boundary on a pocket. He has good size and strength. Spoiler alert, this guy's going to be also in the guard rankings, and he's going to do pretty damn well. But I digress. This guy needs to be a guard. He just does not know how to establish the establish the boundary on a pocket. He has good size and strength, but my oh my. His hand placement is atrocious. He cannot handle space very well as he gets himself out of position, and it is dangerous keeping him tackled in the NFL. He would never make it at this rate. He did not switch on a switch, so he ended up continuing to block a guy that he should have passed off. Again, that theoretically in my mind, that could be system-based, because just like Penn State, but at also the same time, there are other reasons that made me feel like he wasn't fully processing as well. He hand fights, but he cannot remain in control of the rep for an extended period of time. For some reason, I could see with some of the flashes in his overall build and power, he could be a legit contender for snaps at offensive guard. He stopped his feet mid-rep, allowing for the defender to disengage and win. I swear I don't know why I love him as a guard, like leagues more, like tiers more than a tackle. He flashes some solid low mechanics, and it's more mental than anything. He could be a lunger and a whiffer because he's not patient in the run game. Smooth kick slide, has pop in his hands. He just misses when the defender closes distance. I effing love his footwork. Definitely at risk of being toesy in the run blocking game. I maybe would try to develop him as a tackle eventually, but he could be a really special guard. He needs to be confident. He needs to have a confident re-anchor. Laiatu Latu has been eating his lunch this whole game. He's not a good blocker, but it seems to be more fixable than any other guy labeled as developmental due to kicking him inside to reduce his issue with spatial awareness. That just says it, man. I mean, I really do have faith in this guy to be successful. Just at the moment, with his understanding of every other player on the field, I think that you could limit that with kicking him to guard, and I think he actually be really, really solid. John Campbell Jr. is next. He is honest. He's just really solid overall, but left tackle there for Tennessee. We'll talk about that same Alabama game that we talked about, Gerald Mincey, who was his teammate now on Kentucky. So he ends up grabbing defenders' arms. He kind of reaches out rather than waits and punches. He prematurely moves out of position. Surprise, surprise, he's doing well versus Justin Owegbe. I have a thing versus Justin Owegbe. Like every offensive lineman I've ever studied is very successful versus Justin Owegbe, but I digress. He's doing a fine job so far. I don't know how he let up 4 pressures this game. His anchor has been relatively solid so far. He ended up getting driven into the quarterback, but I think he lost awareness of the pocket. He has a hard time with fast rushers that convert speed to power. He might need to be kicked into guard. He lowers his shoulders on pull blocks rather than actually blocking the defender. It really is speed to power that gets him. I need to watch out for him getting himself out of position. He dropped too deep and he let up an inside pressure. I really feel like most of his issues can be fixed at guard. He is at risk of being toesy and allowing defenders to get leverage on pass rushing moves. He flashes his one arm reach out, and his anchor ended up being crippled as the game progressed. So there's definitely potential there. At 6'5", 330, I easily can see him kicking into guard. And, it really was like that speed to power that got him with the ability to generate more speed as an edge rusher. So I do think that could be mitigated at the guard position. So yes, once again, he will be regraded as a guard. So another guy who's actually a center this year, but I still wanted to mention him as a tackle because he played left tackle last year. I still think he will end up being an interior offensive lineman, but, it's still worth mentioning. I ended up saying if I have to watch bum-ass Josh Gray, I need to watch Jonah as a tackle. He has nice movement skills and use of length. His anchor is obviously a concern. He's a good athlete with really good tenacity, but he whiffs, and his anchor are massive issues. I would say whiffing could be minimized as a center. I don't know about his anchor overall because it was still an issue when he was a guard. He ended up having a positive sample set versus defensive interiors, but not going to lie, he's doing well versus defensive interiors as his career progressed. He has high-end mirror ability, and it is a shame that his anchor is so ass. This was versus Washington, by the way. So Washington's good defensive interior players. Jonah's just a guy who I really, really like. You'll see that offensive line is labeled as yellow. That's because he's graded far higher as an interior offensive lineman for me. But, it's a shame. If he could end up learning how to anchor himself more, and he's not like he's like a featherweight, 300 pounds. It's not like he's 290 playing tackle. I really do think he could be special. But he's going to be kicked to center. We'll see how that ends up working out this year. Josh Simmons is next. Josh Simmons is like the definition of show, but not really like tell. He looks really, really good, and then just it sometimes doesn't come to fruition. So I have a lot of hope that Josh has that foundation to be successful, and maybe it's like 10% off. Like maybe it is 20%, that 80-20 rule, the 20% makes the 80% difference. And maybe as he develops and becomes a little bit better and better, he ends up allowing that to make him a really good tackle. So I wouldn't be surprised if he succeeds, but I still think he's developmental at the moment. This is notes versus Michigan. It's not his worst graded game at all, but this is one that really does matter, especially because it's a rivalry game. He's a really solid athlete. He needs to get more in control over defenders. He needs to get his hands inside. He gave up an outside angle. It's a fun matchup between him and Moore. He flashes big upside with good footwork and fires his hands, but he just needs to remain consistent throughout the whole rep. He leans forward too much as well. He's been a liability / non-factor in the run game. So bottom line, he's show, not tell. The flashes are there, but it needs to be a bit more consistent. I'm also keeping the guys I've already talked about at a minimum, but we'll continue on. Trey Zuhn is the name I was talking about when I said insert decisiveness, and you'll see he's very decisive. This is a guy who I ended up posting on my Twitter as well. And so this is his game versus Alabama. He has solid hands so far, not overly powerful in the upper body, but he has a stronger lower body. He handles interior defensive linemen relatively well. He lunged and whiffed in the run game. Oh man, he ended up getting bent. Basically a defensive interior bent him. Edge bend. You guys know what I'm talking about. He did not maintain the pocket boundary and let up his outside shoulder. He is very toesy. He froze his feet before punching his hands, leaving a wide open gap for Dallas Turner to take. He's not an amazing athlete. He does know who to block, though. He ended up being driven into the quarterback. There's a video of that on my Twitter, so feel free to check that out. He lunged and ended up whiffing again. He tries, but I don't think he has enough consistency or talent to be a snap taker at the NFL based on his current abilities. He has a good motor. He has flashes of patience. His re-anchor has been solid enough. I like him, but I just don't know how to fix his issues. His best traits are motor and intelligence, which, to be fair, are great foundational traits for a developmental guy. He needs better lateral quickness when engaged. He ended up getting driven into the quarterback back-to-back reps. Length concerns, but to be fair, Turner has long-ass arms. I don't know why I fully thought of him as a left tackle. Maybe it's just because defensive interior seemed to be able to get leverage on him. But we'll see what happens coming this year. Offensive line was kind of an issue there for Texas A&M this past year. Aireontae Ersery is a really fun player to watch. He was the guy who I first started watching when it comes to the expansion of my top tackles to the guys who, basically are this deep dive. Aireontae, I ended up watching his game versus Michigan, so we're going to be talking about that one right here. But this dude is really, really fun to watch. Aireontae Ersery. He has a nice one-arm reach. He has a nice wide base, but it could be he could end up being a little bit less toesy. He has really solid control in the run game with his length so far. A really solid athlete that can play zone blocking extremely well. His feet freeze when he fires his hands in pass protection, allowing for easy bend and pressure. Also, he did not stay square to the defender when he reached out with his one arm. I said he's low-key built to be a 49er. I'm surprised I didn't put that as a dream fit, but it is what it is. Yeah, I don't even know what. That's a surprise. I ended up like literally mentioning 49ers and I didn't put it as a dream fit, so that's on me. But maybe you could have that as your 4th dream fit. There you go. Okay, he really needs to learn how to refire his hands. He fully extends and basically lets the guys slide off him, leaving him reaching out and not controlling in pass protection. So essentially, he's like out like this the whole time and just stays out there. So first off, you can get your arms chopped when you do that. But more importantly, like when your arms are out here and they're fully extended and like a defender decides not to be pushing into you, you're not able to push into him unless you're like lunging your body forward. There's no extra tricep extension. There's no extra chest power in there. So I think he needs to be a little bit more reserved there. Bottom line is pass blocker, as you can see, he is far more in need of work than as a run blocker. He has a nice initial step, but those feet just do not move well enough in his kick slide. He is fully nose over the toes. He has a clean transition in the run game from a defensive lineman to a linebacker. Deep down, I think he should be a guard with the deficiencies, but he still has the upside of an offensive tackle. He ended up getting driven right into the quarterback by an edge rusher. He whiffed when lunging at Mason Graham. Man, the footwork is ass. Poor guy needs to remain calm. He ends up panicking and goes haywire. The anchor is suspect on versus wide 9 edge defenders. There is semi-length concern for me. I think that he leans so far forward because his anchor is very, very, very poor on fast-moving edge rushers, and his arms just might not be long enough. He ended up getting block shed due to leaning too far forward once again. Overall, he's a big project with great upside. So I think that he's going to be taken early. He's somebody that is like a really good blocker on the move, and he's just like very, very role-specific early on, unless you want to kick him to guard. So let's continue on with Josh Conerly. One of the guys who I ended up not regrading as a guard. I could end up rewatching him, but like he's a 5-star former tackle, and I think everybody's thinking of him to be a tackle. So hoping that he ends up doing that. But at 6'4", 305, and especially like with his overall game, with his length, he might end up having to kick to guard. TBD on that. But this is a guy who I'm kind of like wishing to be a tackle. So we're not going to be including him with the guards. His game versus Washington, the first one, was by far his worst game. He's a really solid athlete. He's not landing his hands consistently. He lunges in the run game and he can whiff. He got backed up into the quarterback early. He has some dumbass reps, basically, like where he looks deer in headlights. He has high-end reps for sure. I can definitely see the it factor with him. He just slips up a lot. He needs more patience because it gets him in trouble when he gets a little bit panicky. He's a little bit late off the ball a little bit too often. He can't stop his feet like he does when he has elongated engagements. He reaches more than punches. So it kind of is more so like reaching out and receiving contact rather than initiating and like punishing. He has some great reps with firing his hands in pass pro. He just needs to be more consistent. Needs to work on his re-anchor ability. He has an issue with easy, quick wins and hugging guys because he's anxious and not patient enough to let him come in and then engage. He has chosen the wrong guy to block a couple of times for some reason. Basically, when he has to decide between like who to block, he ends up choosing the wrong one. He really needs to learn on how to fire his hands in the run game as well. Being late off the ball has allowed a couple of players to get the first step on him and end up getting a pressure. He really needs to end up getting back more, but overall, this guy has a ton of potential, and I do believe that with proper coaching and time, he can end up being successful. So, talking about another Oregon player, Johnny Cornelius. If you guys will notice a pattern, the majority of these next guys I've already talked about. But also from that same Washington game, it was his worst graded pass blocking game. He did end up improving the second time around. He's not very laterally quick. His outside shoulder seems to be very easy to take. He has tenacity, but he gets driven off his spot a lot. He lowers his head a bit too much upon initial contact. He has great response he ends up having a really solid response though to counter moves. It's weird because he looks slower than he is, but he does give up his shoulder and no one has really taken it. It's weird maybe because it's just the camera angle, because Zion Tupuola-Fatui is fast and got the jump right away and still did not get the edge, but he did get inches away from it. He's been a little late off the ball as well, but he does flash patience. So he's just somebody that kind of knows where to go. Like when you end up not hearing anything, especially about like run block, it's like sometimes it's just solid. like there's sometimes stuff that you just don't need to know, and that's why I also have my grading sheet. I could just read these notes as like talk about my face, and then it'd be easier on me that way. But I do think that context, I don't need to write every single stat down. You guys just need to understand the notable takeaways. He's a good run blocker though. He's smart. He knows what to do. And I had to boost his mobility because it's like he doesn't seem like the most like fast guy on planet Earth, but nobody takes his shoulder. Like maybe it's just that maybe the camera angle wasn't good. So continuing on, Armand Membou versus Georgia. I do think this guy's going to be a guard, but he could technically be a tackle, right tackle out of Mizzou. It was his worst game. Jay Walker is shown out on his minimal reps, but regardless, Armand Membou has some pop. He's not the highest IQ when on the move. That was like a really weird thing. They have some weird form when they're blocking on the run, where he's pretty much making them block with their back. He has hand fighting ability. He assisted a guard in losing the battle. He assisted a guard losing basically the guard was fucking up and he ended up helping out. And he still popped the edge rusher. He ends up having high-end flashes. He has rare hand fighting ability. It's almost as if he has... I wonder if he was once a defensive lineman, because it seemed like he has defensive line level hand fighting ability or martial arts combat. His pass protection identification ability, so his pass blocking IQ is elite, but his run blocking IQ is not. He ended up getting thrown off by Mikael Williams when his feet were too close together in the run game, so he needs to keep a consistent base. Second time I saw him leave the outside shoulder open too much, allowing an edge rusher to bend. He needs to mirror a bit better. He's a really solid athlete overall. His feet got messed up moving right, and he ended up being way out of position. So would want him to have much more control in the run game as well, but it's just weird. Like they're just... Missouri's weird. He really needs to work on his kick slide right, because it's just not working out for him. He might need to be a guard transfer if he can't fix his feet. His anchor's been relatively mid. He ended up flashing a snatch technique, which basically is snatching and pushing a guy down. Weird thing about him is he has damn near elite pass blocking IQ and hand technique with garbage run IQ and footwork. So yeah, it's just a weird study. Lateral mobility really showing up as an issue versus faster edge rushers. Strongly feel he should be a guard based on the strengths and weaknesses, but he can be a tackle if he works on the footwork and foot speed. Next, we got Jonah Savania. Or Savania. It's tough to pronounce names, man. I mean, I'm turning to Broshma at this point. But I ended up studying his game versus UCLA, so let's talk about that. He's a feisty dude. He could stick a little bit more inside and because he did a good job reacting to inside moves. Or I ended up seeing him do some good reactions to inside moves, but I still think he could stick inside a bit more because he gets himself out of position. I've seen a few times now where he's giving up too much room inside, but he has yet to let up an inside pressure, so there could be some coachability there. He needs to work on double team, like passing on guys. He went beyond the interior defensive lineman and let up an angle for the running back for a tackle for loss. So basically when he was double teaming a player, he got out of position, which allowed an easy shed essentially where a guy could split the double team. Ended up hitting Coleman for a tackle for loss. Latu put him in a blender with a spin move rip once again, and he ended up leaving inside room, so it ended up being inside pressure. He has quick enough slide to get depth, but he does not need to overcompensate the way he does. He did not remain square till Latu reached outside with one arm, which is a big no-no versus an elite hand fighter. Basically, you need to not get yourself out of position when a guy takes advantage of guys who get out of position. You have to remain square to counter losing your outer edge. Latu is feasting, and it's because Savania is not mirroring properly. He has not been great in run blocking for how good he looks, like he could be. He's getting absolutely destroyed by Latu because he's lunging and basically just going fucking bonkers. So I think that he needs to just kind of calm himself down work on his positioning more. And a lot of people say he should be kicked into guard. But I think that, like, even some people say center, but I do think that there is a really strong future for him at tackle, and it's a pretty clear path for it. So I'm excited for him to get there. Anthony Belton is next. This guy I do think should be probably kicking into guard, but doesn't need to be. It's basically his hand placement's ass. It's just complete ass. But he is a headhunter. He sees contact. This is game versus Clemson. He needs to get his hands inside more for control. His hands are genuinely awful. His feet stop before his hand fire, leading to getting beat outside. He has very good patience. If he learns to get his hands inside, I think a lot of his issues probably go away. He does need to keep his feet moving through the whole rep. Short and sweet, but, I think the graphic tells you pretty much everything you need to know. He is powerful. He doesn't get moved. And basically, he just needs to work on his hands, and I think that got the best of him quite a few times. Now let's talk about Kelvin Banks. This is a surprising one. People won't imagine him being 6 because he's like 1 or 2 for everybody. But this is the first time I think I'm reading my actual notes of these guys to y'all, so you'll understand the process. So this is the game versus Washington. He has to watch out for dipping his head when he's in run blocking. I would like his hands a bit more inside. He does not strike the chest plate, and he gets his hands into the face of defenders, and probably even will get holding calls. He has solid length. He keeps striking high, which will lead to lots of hands to the face. He has a pretty strong anchor as well, and he's a solid athlete. He plays through the whistle. He overall has patient hands. He can lose his place in the pocket, leaving an easier angle on his outside shoulder to the quarterback. He can also be overzealous and lunge, which ended up being a problem a lot of the times in run blocking. But if you look at the grades, like, there just really is one consistency, and that's the fact that he doesn't land his hands properly. And especially in the run game, if you dip your head and you don't land your hands, it's not going to end up being a net positive for you versus edge rushers that respond properly and also can take advantage of guys who don't do the mechanical stuff properly. So there's certainly a really bright future for Kelvin Banks. I think that it's very logical to have him very high, and I think he will end up getting even better as the season goes on. But overall, there's not an issue I have with him. It's just if you can't land your hands and you're dipping your head, most likely you're not going to really have that same level of success. Blake Miller is next. Also, you'll see it is very hard to grade well as an offensive lineman for me. Like corners, it's much easier to grade well. And I'm trying to work on that portion. But for offensive tackles, I'm very, 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 very high scrutiny. And I think you should be, because offensive linemen, you need to be good on every single play. But Blake Miller is next. Some people think he might be kicked into guard for length concerns, but we'll talk about that nonetheless. I still think he should be a right tackle. But this is game versus Clemson. He has a nice job keeping his shoulders square and using his length. He's very quick with his feet as well. He does tend to get out of place when he is on rundowns. That's pretty often as well. He can get driven back. He's not an overwhelming athlete. He has a hard time processing what to do when another player lines up next to him, i.e. a tight end or basically a pulling guard acting as a tackle for a rep. So that's why I don't think he'd work as a guard. He just looks uncomfortable. Not that he can't do it, but just the mental processing doesn't seem to be there when he has someone next to him. So he processes better when he has space. He cannot stop his feet when he fires his hands, especially when faster edge rushers luckily can, but especially when he's facing faster edge rushers. The good news is he can recover well enough. He is toesy in the run game. His tracking downfield is relatively spotty. His anchor is usually solid, but it can break. So it's kind of like hit or miss, not necessarily like consistent in one way or another. He does seem to have a tougher time processing what to do overall. He gets too heavy on his toes after engaging with a player for more than a second. So as the rep progresses, he ends up getting more and more toesy. And when you do that, you're easier to throw off, by the way. I want to see more one-arm reach-outs, especially on the move. It seems to be a major potential increase to efficiency on his failed blocks on the move. He just kind of reaches out with both arms, and defenders can chop both of them very easily. He definitely has potential, but there are critical flaws that'll bite him in the ass if he does not improve. Now we're going to talk about Jack Nelson. So Jack Nelson should be coming on the show this week or next. Shout out to him for that. We ended up connecting and looking forward to it. So super excited for this. He was somebody who I ended up watching like a couple years ago, and I just wasn't overly impressed, gotta admit. Like, I just didn't see that. And I was kind of watching Jack Nelson out of like requirement this year because it's like, hey, I think he's going to be coming out. And my God, he blew my expectations. And I love players who develop their game. Like, transparency, I reached out to him saying, hey, dude, I love the development you've had. Because personally, I just didn't like him as a prospect a couple years ago. I mean, to be fair, he was still great as a developmental guy. Like, he's moved up 2 tiers. But remember when I was telling you guys that like good players with good motor and good development can move up multiple tiers? That's exactly Jack Nelson. So I'm very, very confident in his ability overall. Very excited to be able to talk with him one-on-one because we haven't had an offensive lineman on the show yet. And spoiler, we're going to have 2 of our top 4 guys on the show. So 2 guys I have a lot of respect for, can really teach you guys and maybe even myself some more things about the position. But Jack Nelson, let's talk about his game versus Ohio State. He so far has a solid base and he has solid balance. He has also very good patience. Solid hand placement, but his anchor can be relatively suspect from down to down. Honestly, he's been extremely dominant in pass protection. He is at risk of lunging in the run game, which also can lead to him being easily shed. I really like his hand fire ability and his active feet. I might want a little bit more 1-2 punch, but it ends up still working out. He remained calm and composed through an entire rep and threw a hand chop as well. I posted that on my Twitter. JT Tuimoloau did a hand chop and he just ended up remaining in control through that. JT's not a slouch either. That's a fringe edge rusher in the NFL who has like solid edge bending ability, great size at 270, and when you're that big, those hand chops are heavier too. So he ended up being able to remain dominant or maintain control, which is something I ended up saying well done. Like, it was great. It seemed like he hurt his left leg on a certain play, but he still stayed in. So I love that fighter mentality. It's an unbelievably dominant performance versus a relatively NFL talent. His worst aspect of the game is his downfield run blocking because he does end up getting lungy/toesy. He gave up a pressure with his outside shoulder. It happened a couple times this game. He ends up giving the pressure up with his outside shoulder. He just did not hold up the boundary of the pocket. I said, oh my, defender tried to do the same thing 2 plays later, and it ended up being stonewalled. I posted that as well. I love the learning ability. He ended up still giving up his outside shoulder, but it still was something that, overall he did a good job. Definitely want him to hold the boundary of the pocket better. He got spin moved because he got overzealous getting depth, and got angled he ended up angling his shoulders instead of staying square to the defender. So he ended up getting spin moved to the inside because pretty much over pursuit. I mean, corners do the same thing, dude. In breaking routes, when you get overzealous and you point your shoulders north, like, dudes will get under you really quickly. He got his ankles broken on a double move, so that was quite funny. But overall, extremely promising, especially since he tweaked his knee and kept playing. And that might have been the reason why he was starting to slip up. So something I really do love about him, he's a fighter. He will play through some uncomfortability. And the fact is, when he started showing issues, it was after he ended up getting hurt. So there's a lot of promise there for him to get fully healthy. Some people think that he can play guard. For me, I'm pretty much confident that he's going to be a tackle, though. But like, one of those guys that, again, this is what I love so much about scouting. You come in, the general consensus is not really going to be a top-end player, and you watch him and you fall in love. And you're like, that's a guy who I want to stick my name to. Jack Nelson is exactly that. At 6'7" as well, 312, that's a really solid build. Getting to the point where it's getting close to too tall, but at 6'7", that is kind of like just right. Will Campbell is next. So, I mean, I really love Will Campbell. He has 33-inch arms, so I do have my concerns of moving him into guard. But this is some short notes versus Missouri, because the game versus Bama, the first half was pretty damn atrocious, but I digress. I appreciate his patience, and he does show solid hand placement on the chest. He has really solid pop as well. He ended up getting pushed back by Darius Robinson, but had a really solid re-anchor. He ended up having a much better game when not getting outlengthed, or maybe Dallas Turner is just that good. So short and sweet, because the majority of my stuff I've already talked about for Will Campbell in the previous videos. But yeah, bottom line, Will Campbell, the main concern is length. Like, he ends up getting outlengthed by certain players. The good news is it doesn't seem to be a consistent issue. It might have been just Dallas Turner is special, which I thought he was. But Will Campbell really does bring a really solid foundation of pretty much everything that you are looking for. And that's what you're looking for in the NFL, because there are a lot of offensive linemen that don't bring balance to the table. And when they end up losing, they lose big. I don't think Will Campbell does that apart from when he gets driven back by lengthier defenders. Emery Jones is next. Again, barely ahead of Will Campbell and Jack Nelson. And there's a lot of people who think Emery Jones should solely be an interior offensive lineman. I think he'd be even better as an interior offensive lineman. But regardless, this is my notes versus Alabama for Emery. He is a nice explosive mover. He identified a little bit late on a percentile linebacker switch. He gets a bit toesy. He ends up getting really toesy, by the way. So far, he ends up looking as like the best tackle, which before my last guy I watched, he was. He just needs to learn to sit back more on his heels, and he can be an elite potential offensive tackle, but he does have possible length concerns. So, just basically an elite lineman. Great re-anchor, got toesy, and then he lost his positioning, ended up losing the rep. He does have a one-arm reach out, and I do love that about him. He does have possible length concerns. He got outlengthed by Chris Braswell, who has sub 33-inch arms. Theoretically, apparently Emery Jones has 33.4-inch arms, but that's not confirmed. Initial anchor has been spotty, but great re-anchor. He got pull rip because he ended up being too toesy. Bottom line, he sits his ass back in his heels. He could be even a blue chip offensive lineman. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. But this is what y'all have been waiting for. Marques, he's coming on the show. So I'm going to try to say this. I think it's Mbow. I should have done this before, so I'll take it on the chin. But Mbow sounds sick. I mean, I think of like Xiaolong Bao, like soup dumplings. It's like one of my favorite foods. So I'm going to associate my favorite tackle with my favorite Chinese food. There's a good place called Fortune House in Dallas that ends up making their own stuff here. So shout out to them. Also shout out to Trader Joe's because they have some good soup dumplings. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But Marques is sometimes considered to be a potential guard. He ended up getting injured mid-season, so that's why there's the 1- there. But he ended up getting over 6 weeks of full tape, and his worst game graded was versus Illinois, and that's the game we're going to talk about. And that's the game that stood out to me the most as well. So super excited for this one. So he has a nice ability to mirror in space. He's not overly athletic, but he is far from not athletic. He has a nice one-arm initiation and pass protection. His initial anchor is not great, and he can get backed up. He attacks defenders' hands and swipes them. It's a pretty great tool to have. His hand placement in the run game has been also quite solid, and control has also been there too. He navigates holes well, and he ends up walling it off, allowing for the rusher to get behind him without contest. He stays square too, which is a massive W. Unfortunately, your standards do begin to drop where if an offensive lineman does something correctly, you're like, yes! But that's just college. I mean, for Purdue, this is unbelievably amazing. He has pop in his hands. I think his legs need a little bit more juice, and that might come with a few extra added pounds of muscle. His ability to mirror and stay square and maintain a nice pocket boundary makes him a must-stay at offensive tackle. I have very few issues with his game overall. Excellent rebound when Tyrone Tracy ended up bumping him and did not assist him with a chip block. I ended up posting that on my Twitter as well. That is what actually Marques and I connected on. So shout out to Marques right there. But that was an insane play. Honestly, fantastic game so far. He has pancake power. His anchor is his biggest negative, and I think it will help to add a little bit extra weight. He ended up having a snatch as well. I would like for more length usage on pulls, but because that's like the exclusive time where I see issues with that, he likes to use the shoulder ram. I mean, tight ends, offensive linemen, a lot of these guys are just taught to use your shoulder to ram guys when you are doing a pull block. For me, it's like, I just see the whiff potential in the NFL. So it's kind of more of a minute thing than anything. He has elite hand fighting technique, almost as if he's been trained in mixed martial arts or hand-to-hand combat. He ended up getting too toesy in the run game and was thrown off. The next run play, he did a phenomenal job versus Johnny Newton. Jerzon. It's not Jonathan, but Johnny Newton. So he ended up rebounding and ended up learning from his mistake. I am genuinely impressed. So this was a guy who I ended up studying as the first guy for the interior offensive line because I saw Broshmo had him as a guard. He hasn't graded him yet, but he had him listed as a guard. And I saw this. I'm like, well, he's a right tackle. I might as well study this guy first in case he should be a tackle. And he ended up being my favorite tackle. So, smooth lower body mechanics, great upper body mechanics, stays square. Like, this guy is honestly fantastic and literally never even heard of his name before just seeing him pop up in a couple lists. So that's the thing I love about scouting. Marques is the like microcosm of everything. Like he is the encapsulation of everything I love about scouting. It's like it's a player that you have no idea about, who you cannot scout the helmet because Purdue is not like the offensive line is like, it's not OLU. And then it's just someone that you just fall in love with because you just watch their game and like, wow, this is somebody that needs way more respect than they do. And then when you get to meet these guys and actually get to connect with them, like it just makes me so excited. So I'm hoping this is the beginning of a really strong relationship because this guy's an absolute badass. Super excited for it. But that is an hour and 25 minutes or something into this video. My voice needs a rest. I'm going to go for a long ass walk and be able to just calm the fuck down. So thank you so much for watching. I love you. See you on the far side. Peace.